Introduction. The goal of a man. A man is increasingly hard to find. We live in a society of boys 20, 30, 40, 50, and 60-year-old boys. Many guys today seem to have the goal of maintaining a junior high mentality all the way through life. The ultimate in life seems to be to retire, still a boy. I suggest there is virtually no difference between the shuffleboard courts of St. Petersburg, Florida, and the parties at Daytona Beach. The proof of my suggestion is those that playing shuffleboard would be at Daytona Beach if they were 50 years younger. I'm not they've not developed into men at all. They've just gotten older. Today many seem to agree with the ad, I don't want to grow up because I'm a Toys R Us kid. The statistics seem to confirm that a large percentage of males never make it to maturity. Andrew Kimbrell, attorney and policy director for the Washington, D.C.-based Foundation on Economic Trends, collected some startling figures on the state of men in American culture. The suicide rate among men overall is 4 times that of women, while their life expectancy is 10% shorter. Men account for 2/3 of all alcoholics, 90% of all arrests for alcohol and drug abuse violations, 80% of our country's homeless, and 60% of high school dropouts. Black males have the lowest life expectancy of all segments of the population. More than half of all black boys are raised without fathers. There are more black men in jail than in college, and 40% more black women go to college than black men. Among blacks in the 20 to 29 age group, 10 times more men than women, 1 in 4, are either in jail, on probation, or on parole. Of course, we all know exceptions. Men who have become true men of God, who have penetrated their world in a dynamic way. What makes the difference? Did they have a secret? Is there a key ingredient that turns some boys into men, while most don't make it? I believe there is. One day, I received a letter from a friend who lives in another city. I hadn't seen him for quite a while, but I'd discipled him for a long time some years ago. He was in his mid-50s, and he wrote to tell me how it was going with his family, job, ministry, and so on. At first, I read his letter only because of my personal interest in him, but then it hit me. This guy had become what I'd like all the men I meet to become, a family patriarch. It wasn't because he was a super saint or because everything was perfect in his life. Some of his kids were doing great, some were not. Some of his ministry was good, some was not. Sometimes he was successful at his job, sometimes not. Both his mother and his mother-in-law depended on him. He was on the boards of Christian organizations and of his church. He taught Sunday school. He had, and still has, a great relationship with his wife, and she also has an active ministry. I've been in his house. His kids love him because he loves them, even when they sin. Since the day he was saved 20 years ago, he's gotten up and studied the Bible from 5 to 7 every morning. Not because he had to or had disciplined himself to, but because he wanted to. Then, after he finished studying, he made sure his kids were up and helped his wife get them off to school. He's looked up to in his church, his neighborhood, his occupation, his city, and especially by his wife, his kids. And kids. He's a patriarch. I know what you're thinking. Yeah, right. Or, this guy sounds too good to be true. Or, so maybe there are people like that. But should know the creeps I know. Let me tell you, not only is this guy a patriarch, but I know others in other cities who have known for years, who are now in their 50s and are very much like this man. Sure, I also know a lot of creeps. What's even more fascinating is that I know a lot of males who aren't creeps and who want to be men of God, but never make it. After reading my friend's letter, I asked myself, what is the difference between the guys who make it and the ones who do not? As I thought about it, an obvious fact came to mind. The men of God who are in their 50s were going on for God wanted to be family patriarchs. In other words, they wanted not only to be fathers, but shepherds of extended families. They had a common goal, even as younger men, to patriarch a family. They did not have it spelled out in so many words, but they had the patriarch image in mind as an ideal. As I looked at the Bible, it occurred to me that if I wanted to study the good guys, the patriarch examples are the easiest to find: Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, David, Solomon, Jesus, and Peter. Every single man, such as Daniel and the Apostle Paul, were patriarchs. If you find a hero in the Bible, you've probably found a patriarch. I suggest that most men who become patriarchs are men who, as young men, wanted to be patriarchs. They each have a picture in mind when they picked up from a father that they picked up from a father, grandfather, or other significantly godly men in their lives. Man in their lives. A patriarch is not a retired grandfather who is set in his ways and basically out of it, following the lead of his grandchildren. A patriarch is a man who is working at something vital, plugging into his culture, leading his grandchildren, keenly aware of life's challenges, inventive, alert, and challenging the socks off his wife, children, grandchildren, and the extended family around him as he grows in wisdom and knowledge of the Lord. Patriarchy should be the goal of the human male. It is the patriarchs of our world's communities who have challenged boys to become men, sometimes by their words, but mainly by the example provided by their very existence. When patriarchs are absent, boys are not motivated to become men, and instead remain boys all their lives. But patriarchy, as crucial as it is, must be a boy's long-term goal, not his first one. His first goal should become a man. There are at least three major stages in the development of a male: boy, man, and patriarch. This means there are two major transitions he must make if he is to fulfill the character God gave him. As a boy, he must decide to be a man, and as a man, he must decide to be a patriarch. Important definitions. A boy is a male who is generally chaotic, not yet having personally established order for his life. A man is a male who has taken on the responsibility of establishing order for himself and his immediate family. We will not use the word man in the general sense of an adult male, but is in the specific sense described here. For example, the next section should not be read as two decisions for a male. A patriarch is a man who has taken on the responsibility for establishing maturity for himself and applying it to his extended family. We will not be using the word maturity in the general sense of good, but in the technical sense of what a patriarch becomes. For example, a man does not become mature, he becomes orderly. We can also look at it in this way. A boy is a chaotic male who has not yet taken on the discipline of himself, discipleship of himself. A man is an orderly male who has taken on the discipleship of himself and his immediate family. A patriarch is a mature father who has taken on the discipleship of an extended family. Two decisions for a man. A man goes through two stages on the road to from becoming a boy to becoming a patriarch. A male, once he has decided to be a man, has two more manly choices available to him. He can choose to be a husband, and he can choose to be a father. But a husband must first be a man, a father must first be a husband, and a patriarch must first be a father. It is hard to be a husband if I have not become a man. It is hard to be a father if I have not become a husband, and so forth. So a single parent is usually a contradiction in terms. The Bible knows of no such designation. The basis of parenting for a man is husbanding, not singleness. Can single parenting be done? Of course it can be done, but only with great difficulty and a limited chance of success. Since male development usually follows this pattern, failure at any level requires development at the next lower level. What a man must do to help his marriage is to ask himself, what is lacking in me as a man? It will do little good or to deal with his marriage relationship with his wife until he is a man, that is, a male worth being married to. In the same way, parent-child problems require men to go back and work on their marriage, and patriarch problems reflect a need for fathering. The challenge is to be a greater giver. The hierarchy represents different levels of giving. A boy is a getter, a man is a giver, a husband is a greater giver, a father is a still greater giver, and a patriarch is the greatest giver of all. So the challenge life puts to a male is to learn how to give. By the way, money is a less significant part of giving as one ascends in the hierarchy. This varies with each case, as we shall see later when we look into the Bible, but generally speaking, a patriarch who defines his role primarily with money is probably perverting his extended family. A boy is a getter, and a man is a giver to himself. But there is a big difference between getting and giving to yourself. A getter looks to others to supply his needs or wants. The difference between a want and a need is that a want is what I think I should have, and a need is what God thinks I should have. Matthew 6:25 through 34. A boy, no matter what his age, who gets a job is usually still looking for mothering. He looks to his job as a mothering substitute. He expects his job to take care of him with a steady salary, insurance, job security, tenure, pension, or whatever it takes to mother him. Many males, having remained boys all their lives, look to their government, their friends, their wives, their children to mother them. A man, on the other hand, is a giver who first of all gives to himself. That might sound selfish and immature, almost boyish. Not so. The difference between getting and giving to ourselves is in who takes responsibility for obtaining the need. This does not preclude my depending on God to meet my needs. A man has faith that God will supply his needs. A boy doesn't think of it and therefore depends on others to mother him. So a male progresses through some identifiable stages in his path towards maturity. A boy first becomes a man, who then becomes a patriarch. Each stage of development requires that a decision be made to take on the next life role. If a decision is not made, the male will physically progress to the place where he looks like he ought to be a man or patriarch, but actually will be spiritually back where he made his last decision. If he never made any decision, then he is in all spiritual reality still a boy. Different stages mean different transitions. A boy is very different from a man, and a man is very different from a patriarch. The three have different ways of looking at life. Their jobs are different. Their goals are different. The way they view God is different. Because of this, the transition from a boy to a man is very different than the one from a man to a patriarch. Several principles must be considered as we move forward. A boy leads to a man, it leads to a patriarch. Growth is from a boy, a man, to a patriarch. Regression is anywhere backwards. Number one, it's always good to move forward being a patriarch. Move forward being a patriarch, and it's never good to regress back towards being a boy. Boys will be boys only because they must move through certain developmental phases to become a man. In that sense, it is not bad to be a boy, but it is bad to remain a boy or revert back to being a boy when it's time to move on to becoming a man. Movement from left to right is always good, while movement from right to left is always bad. It's possible for a boy to become a man, and it's possible for a man to become a patriarch, but it's not possible for a boy to become a patriarch. All movement toward the patriarch is good, but it must be done one phase at a time. The more manly one is, the more likely he is to become a patriarch. A boy is in chaos, a man establishes order, and a patriarch pursues maturity. What makes a boy is that he pursues chaos. He has not ordered his life. His life is not yet headed in a direction. He lacks discipline to accomplish tasks. He has not yet taken significant ownership of values or virtues. A man has pursued order. He has established himself apart from his parents. He has learned to work and to balance that with rest. He has disciplined himself to follow God, cleave to a wife, and father his children. He is orderly. A patriarch is not disorderly. Disorder is chaos. But he no longer motivated by order. A patriarch is expanding beyond order, creating new avenues for life and ministry and challenging the horizons of his extended family. He is mature. Number 4. We all have boyish, manly, and patriarchal tendencies. It's true, boys will be boys. Unfortunately, it's also true that in some areas of their lives, men will be boys too. Although all males can be called either a boy or a man or a patriarch, we are not 100% any one of them. In some areas, we are still boys. In other areas, we are men. And in some things, we are patriarchs. For example, my tendency is to be a boy with respect to physical exercise. I hate to work out, and I'm no good at sports. So, in order to give some order to my boyish chaos, I began jogging 6 miles every other day. Since I ran about a 10-minute mile, that is about 1 hour. I got my chaos into order, but it took constant discipline. Last year, I developed arthritis in my hips, so I have gone to walking with some hand weights. I do it for 45 minutes, and I hate every step. It takes discipline. I'm also an eataholic. I'm never full. If I ate as much as I'd like, I'd weigh 300 pounds, but I weigh 170. Why? Discipline. I restrict my eating by certain rules. If left unchecked, my tendency concerning exercise and food would be that of a boy. I also have a manly tendency. I'm ordered about my work. It's easy for me to stay at a job until it's finished. My work is focused and aimed at a goal. In my teaching, I tend toward being a patriarch. I don't need discipline because I love to do it. I look for ways to be creative, innovative, and original. I take risks and try out new ideas. So, in some ways, I tend to be a boy, in other areas, a man, and here and there, a patriarch. I must talk about all three. For a boy, we need to talk not about our boyishness per se, but about how we can overcome it to be a man. See chapters 1 through 5. For a man, we need to think about what it means to establish order, especially as a husband and a father. See chapters 6 through 10. For a patriarch, we need to consider what it takes to mature. See chapters 11 through 15, so we can picture the rest of the way the book this way. Part 1, 2, and 3. Becoming a mature man. I once heard someone say, God created people because he likes stories. Although there's obviously more to it than that, I find this statement intriguing. But since God created people as male and females, we must ask, why did God create males? What's their part in this story? Three things are important to understand as you read this book. One, this is not a book about women. I think it is a book women will want to give to their men. It's also a book for women as well as men, in that they will give women biblical insight about men, but is not a book about women. As you read this book, whether you are a man or a woman, you might be tempted to apply these things to women. That should not be done. I'm making no claim that any of this applies to women. I have a wife and 3 daughters who are all exciting women and the delights of my life. They've even helped me write this book. But while this book is from some women, it is not about women. A relational concept book has been published called The Mature Woman. For more than 20 years, my ministry has been with men: businessmen, bankers, salesmen, students, mechanics, doctors, real estate agents, lawyers, husbands, fathers, lovers, haters, rich and poor. It was these men and what their Bible has to say to them that motivated this book. A second thing to understand reading this book is I'm neither a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a sociologist. I have a master's degree in theology and a doctorate in Bible. I'm a Bible teacher. I don't come to the study of men from a psychological standpoint, but from a biblical one. For me, there is no danger of slapping Bible verses on psychological concepts because I don't know any psychological concepts. Of course, my background does affect my perspective, just like everyone else. That's why I want you, the reader, to understand my background. I have been teaching the Bible to men, primarily on a one-on-one or small group basis since 1971. I have a little wood plaque on my office wall that a young man carved for me during a conference I taught on evangelism years ago. It reads, I am determined to know nothing more than the Bible knows. Apparently, I said it so much he thought I'd like it on a plaque. He was right. I've had it on my wall for over 20 years now. It's true. I am determined to know nothing more than the Bible knows. For example, when I teach this material to men, I'm often asked if it applies to women. My answer is always the same. I don't know anything about women. At this point, most people think he has a wife and 3 daughters. Surely he knows something about women. Most people equate knowing with knowing their experience. I don't. I equate knowing with knowing the Bible, and I have never studied what the Bible says about women. I have only scratched the surface of the women, but I don't know any more than that. I guess, speculate, and make opinions about other things. But I am determined to do the best I can to not know anything beyond what the Bible says. There's a third thing I'd like to say before we get started. That is, as far as I know, as far as I know, a unique book. I know of no other Christian book that deals with the two major transitions in a man's life. I have a 3-foot high stack of Christian men's books that were written in the last year or so. Some are poor, some are so-so, and some excellent. But none of them consider what the Bible says about the transition a boy must make to become a man and what a man does to become a patriarch. I believe we are looking into unexplored territory. And now it's time to do Some.